Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Thank you for the introduction. I want you to take this first slide is really important, actually. Usually rush past the first slide. It's important, first of all, because I've got two or three of my co-authors in the audience. Three of my co-authors, Stuart Gillespie, who's the joint lead author with me, and then we've got Nick Nisbet somewhere, right there, and Venkatesh Manar, who's there. They're all sitting over there. The important reason to focus on this first slide is because you don't often see the words politics and malnutrition together. So, and I think that's a shame, and we wanted to try to build on what some people have done to bring these two lenses together and to add some momentum to that research agenda. Now, politics, I'm at the Institute of Development Studies, so nutrition is one of the things we do. We do lots of different things in international development, and international development is political. There's no two ways about it. It's political in this country and it's political in every country. So why would we expect attempts to reduce malnutrition to be any different? But malnutrition, I think, is even potentially more political than some other issues. Why? Because A, it needs lots of different actors to come together to work in concert towards something that none of them could achieve on their own. And that requires a lot of coordination, aligning of incentives. There'll be some contestation and negotiation, and that's the definition of politics. Two, we know malnutrition in many of its guises is invisible. That means that people can get away with stuff. They can conveniently ignore stuff. They can pretend something is this when it's really that. So this invisibility also makes the political aspect really important. And the third issue is that there are lots of these different actors and organizations and entities have very different power bases and power reserves, if you like. Whether it's the Ministry of Finance versus the Ministry of Health versus the Ministry of Agriculture, or whether it's large-scale private sector companies versus small-scale private sector companies. There are lots of power differentials, and when you get lots of power differentials, politics comes into play. So we've heard a lot about the technical aspects, we've heard a lot about the policy and program aspects, and I want to tell you a little bit about the political aspects. Now, we've really had to scrabble around for evidence in this area. We are in David's realm of plausibility. We tried to winnow out the bad plausibility studies and focus on the good plausibility studies. We can't do too much on causality, strict causality. We do have a few RCTs, we do draw on a few systematic reviews, but we're mainly dabbling in this plausibility world. And we're trying to get, a lot of the evidence we draw on is actually from outside of nutrition, and we try to see what relevance it may have for nutrition. I think we avoid Zulfi's fuzzy-wuzzy expert opinion. I don't know, you can tell us if we do or not. So this is the diagram you've seen many times today. We're focusing on this purple box down at the bottom. Now, the purple box down at the bottom makes its appearance in lots of conceptual models. In the UN, UNICEF kind of framework, it's usually the one at the bottom. And it's usually kind of got labels such as basic or structural or fundamental or, whatever you feel like adding to it. And these labels have two big problems, I think. The first big problem is that you kind of get a sense that these factors are fixed factors. You can't do much about them. You've just got to accept them as they are. And the second thing that's problematic about them is that you think that they're actually very far removed from nutrition, and it's kind of, some politician's role to affect them, and it's nothing to do with the nutrition community. I think we're trying to say, actually, we're contesting those two assumptions, and we're saying the nutrition community should do something about these things, we think, and two, they're not fixed. They are fluid, and they can change over time. So what we're really trying to say is commitment can be built, and commitment needs to be turned into impact. Now, between 2008 and 2013, lots of things have happened in the global nutrition environment. In many ways, you can say that the environment has become much more enabling for malnutrition reduction than it was in 2008. 2008, that we had the Lancet series, which was, a game changer, it seems to me, in terms of marshalling the evidence and making it available to people to use for advocacy, and being a credible set of evidence that we could feel comfortable in using for advocacy. The stewardship of the international nutrition system was fragmented and some would say dysfunctional. We had the 1,000-day window from 2008, which was which was beautiful because it focused our efforts. There are so many things you can do to improve malnutrition. You can't get terribly focused around the interventions, but you can get focused around this point in the life cycle that has ramifications for the rest of the life cycle and intergenerationally. It pinpointed these highly effective interventions, or the specific interventions, and it highlighted the fact that a very small set of countries were home to the vast bulk of undernourished children. The landscape shifted substantially since then. Nutrition is high up on the agenda. We've got this event in 2 days' time, Nutrition for Growth. We've got the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, which has been, I think, again, a big game changer globally and beginning to be a big game changer at the national level. Nearly every development agency has published a nutrition strategy. DFIDs, I'm a local yokel. I think DFIDs is an excellent nutrition strategy, but many other bilaterals, many multilaterals, many organizations have got some very good new strategies. ODA, Overseas Development Assistance to basic nutrition, is still very low, but it has increased substantially as a percentage of the base from between 2008 and 2011. And nutrition is more prominent on most agendas, and I was, notwithstanding Steve's comments about, and David's comments and Richard's comments about don't get complacent, I was very pleased to see it given such prominence in the high-level panel's report. And we've had reports from the people who are in that process, the number of different constituencies and lobbies saying put our issue in. So to get nutrition in there, even in this initial stage, is a big accomplishment. I think we should feel great about that. But there are lots of challenges still. This global commitment that's been built up could easily dissipate quite quickly. Fads and fashions come and go in nutrition. We've got to maintain this global commitment and expand it if possible. We've got to accelerate country-level commitment. That's really, to use the expression, where the rubber hits the road. If it's just something up here and it's not getting any traction at a national and subnational level, we will have failed. And how do we then convert the commitment into action that has an impact to accelerate improvements in nutrition status? And while Marie and others have shown in her paper that economic growth is really important for nutrition, for reducing undernutrition especially, it gets you halfway or just over halfway. Economic growth isn't happening everywhere, number one. And number two, halfway is not good enough. So in the paper we say a more collective approach is needed. An approach that goes beyond government. It can't just be the responsibility of government. Civil society, business and others need to get involved. It can't just be the usual sectors. It can't just be health and agriculture and social services. It has to go into new areas like education, population, and even mobile phones and M. We've got a lot of initiatives on M health. We don't have many on M nutrition. We need to create an enabling environment for nutrition. That means something that helps these actors come together, something that helps new champions emerge. We always get told about Brazil, and that's great, and there are champions elsewhere around the world, but we can't just sort of wait for them to happen to emerge. We've got to create an environment that deliberately grows them and enables them to emerge rapidly, and we've got to empower them as well as empowering ordinary citizens who are claiming their entitlements to these programs, and we've got to incentivize all of these different actors to do the right thing for malnutrition. So we talk a bit about enabling environments in the paper. What does that look like? Well, we say it's focused on three things. First of all, knowledge and evidence and how you frame that knowledge and evidence. We often say knowledge and evidence is power, but really, as we all know, power also shapes how you present knowledge and evidence. So the framing of knowledge and evidence is really important. Politics and governance, for the reasons I gave earlier on, lots of different actors, lots of different incentives, lots of different agendas. How do you get them aligned and moving in the same direction? And then capacity and financial resources. We talk a lot about capacity as a residual. It's not a terribly sexy thing to invest in, but it's an absolutely vital thing to invest in. If you don't invest in it, everything will grind to a halt. And same with financial resources. I'll talk more about this later on, but we do tend to, I think in our community, always look to ODA and then always look to the public sector. And we have to look to the private sector, and we have to look at blends of public and private. I think I've just said most of that. So let me move into this first area around framing and knowledge and evidence. And I just want to focus on one thing because there's not enough time to focus on everything in the paper. And I want to talk about nutrition narratives. Now, the June 8th event, that's a pre-G8 event on Saturday, is called Nutrition for Growth. And that is a very deliberate, I'm sure there were lots of people that pored over that title and said, how are we going to get ministers of finance, how are we going to get people who are not in our nutrition bubble excited about nutrition? And Nutrition for Growth, we've got some DFID representatives in the audience. The UK government is very, very keen on trade, on economic growth, on the private sector. How can we shape this event to make it attractive and appealing to not just the UK government, but other governments who feel the same way? Nutrition for Growth, a nice play on economic growth and also optimal growth for children and mothers. We're working with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation and Results Action on how do you get nutrition into the African Union Ministers of Finance debate. African Union Ministers of Finance are very engaged and actively looking at the demographic dividend, declining birth rates, declining death rates. We've got a bulge of the population that's going to be hitting the labour market in 10, 15 years' time. That is going to be a dividend only if we had good early child development, we can prevent stunting, and children can learn in school. Again, another way of framing nutrition so that it gets traction with a group of people that are very powerful for nutrition but are outside of our nutrition bubble. And I can go on. These are just some other narratives around development, around nutrition, and we've got to be really deliberate and strategic about them. They have to be, I can't emphasize enough, they have to be backed up with credible evidence. If they aren't, we'll fall flat on our faces. On politics and governance, which is the second area I wanted to talk about, the second part of an enabling environment, the two big dimensions that we highlighted are around horizontal coordination, and this is the multi-stakeholder platforms that we hear so much about within, and rightly so, within the Sun movement and in other places. How do you get all these different sectors working together? How do you get all these links in the nutrition chain to be strong and linked? How do you get that to happen? We focus on that in the paper, but we also focus on the vertical coordination. How do you get the centre and national governments working with state governments and with district governments and with mayors? And how do you get that thing working as well? So we talk a lot about incentives and barriers to those two types of coordination. And we have three case studies in the paper. We look at Malawi, Peru, and Maharashtra. And one can say that one can look at the Malawi and Peru stories and say, first of all, they were stories about improving horizontal coordination, going from low to high, and then an improvement in vertical coordination to get to that top right-hand corner. That's where you want to be for nutrition. You want to get good horizontal, good vertical coordination and coherence. Peru, for example, we know the story in Peru. mid-90s, a group of NGOs and civil society organizations get together, say to the presidential candidates, we want you all to sign up to this pledge, this 5 by 5 by 5 pledge, 5% reduction in, I think it was stunting rates for under 5s within 5 years' time. So a nice narrative, 5 by 5 by 5, get them all to sign up. A nice cross-sectoral alliance. 2008, 2009, decentralization of the health system comes along, well placed to make sure that the centre and the districts are working together nicely. Similar story for Malawi. Maharashtra, a different kind of story. Big success story in Maharashtra in terms of stunting declines. The story here is that lots of innovation at the district level, found some really good examples of what works and what doesn't work in a multi-sectoral sense, but they were very district level and micro. The state decides to have a mission. A mission is when a state prioritizes a particular issue. There's a mission at the Maharashtra state level and a scale up of a lot of these interventions, and you get to this top right hand corner. But lots of countries will be much less straightforward than those three cases are, and there will be red lines like this. They'll be all over the place before they get to that top right hand corner, if they ever do. And you need to understand the politics of nutrition, and you need to understand the governance incentives that will get you there. A big part of the politics of malnutrition, and this really goes back to the point that David made about how it's not just about delivery, it's about rights, it's about the ability to claim your entitlements, it's about saying these programs exist but I can't get access to them, or these programs exist but they're so low quality it's actually a bad thing for me to engage with them. It's hard to do that. It's hard for that empowerment and that claiming of entitlements to happen, because the picture, it's hard to figure out who's committed to nutrition and who isn't. And it's hard to figure that out because a lot of the commitments around nutrition, there are lots of fancy words, there are lots of nice plans, but it's really hard to figure out who's spending what on nutrition. It's really hard to figure out which policies matter and which don't. And it's really hard to figure out who signed up to what legal charter and whether that makes a difference or not. So as part of this research program behind a lot of the things in this paper, we report on this in the paper, although this graphic is not in the paper. We've constructed a hunger and nutrition commitment index for 45 high burden countries, and we measure a whole range of spending policies and legal frameworks. So what are countries actually doing? And we construct who's the most committed, who's the least committed relative to each other. One of the interesting things you find is that the commitment to nutrition improvement is not the same thing as the commitment to hunger reduction. They are linked. That straight line shows you that they are statistically associated with each other, although it's quite a weak link, as you can say. It's a very, very scattered scattergram. And so I think that's a really important point. Often a commitment to hunger reduction, and we know hunger reduction is really important for nutrition reduction, but we know it doesn't get you most of the way. Often a commitment for hunger reduction is conflated with a nutrition commitment, sometimes unknowingly and sometimes quite knowingly, quite conveniently. So again, these kinds of tools can help civil society to hold governments to account. I want to talk a bit about capacity to deliver, and this could be titled Capacity to Deliver and to Claim. But it's about capacity for what? It's about prioritizing, sequencing, and scaling. Prioritizing is really important, I think, because we know that nutrition good nutrition is produced by lots of links in the chain working together, and there might be one link that's broken, and it's stopping all this great work in these other areas from actually having the biggest impact on nutrition status that we can have. So we have to identify the weakest link and prioritize that. And I think the capacity to do that, the capacity to sequence and the capacity to deliver we often overlook those. We just kind of assume it will happen or it'll come. So we spend quite a bit of time in the paper talking about the importance of individual, organizational, and systemic capacity. Individual capacity, we talk a lot about leadership. And we think leadership is really important in this area, only because leadership is important. It's important to make the invisible visible. It's important to try to galvanize commitment, and it's important to get people working together. Organizational support is obviously vital. You can't have you need some organizational support. One person can't do it on their own, and you need a system that supports a network of organizations and individuals to make it all come together. So at the systemic level, we talk a lot about spaces for stakeholders to come together and whether their roles are clearly defined. Are they fighting with each other for resources, or are they working together in concert? And how can we flip it from competition to collaboration? We also talk a lot about, it's not just about human resources, it's also about financial resources. And I don't want to overplay financial resources, but obviously they are vital. They're not the only thing that's important, but obviously they're vital. And here's a rather complicated table, I'm afraid. On the horizontal axis, it's resources for nutrition. I split it into public-only, private-only, and public-private networked. And on the vertical axis, we've got donor countries and high-burden countries. And I think a lot of the focus is inevitably drawn on resource mobilization to the public-only donor countries. So a lot of us are quite focused on this for the Saturday event. What are the donors going to deliver for nutrition? Yes, we need increased commitments, but perhaps more importantly, we need the donor countries to be able to incentivize and leverage resource mobilization from governments that are high burden country governments. How can we make the resource mobilization for nutrition on the public side sustainable? And the only way you can do that is to incentivize and leverage public sector resources in high burden countries. On the private sector only, this is, again, in the donor countries, we can talk a lot about ethical trading. We can talk a lot about tax and transparency, and that will be a big part of the June 17th G8 meeting in Northern Ireland. And in high burden countries, it's really important to recognize, as some of those slides Bob showed you earlier, malnutrition and specifically stunting is a big problem in the highest income quintiles. And in the highest income quintiles, those top 3 or 4 income quintiles, they are heavily dependent on getting their food, sometimes water, and sometimes drugs from the market. So even if you don't think the private sector should be involved in undernutrition reduction, they already are. So we have to find a way to figure out how to make sure the incentives and the sticks and the carrots are there to stop the bad stuff and incentivize and praise the good stuff. And I think the middle column is perhaps the most difficult one, and that's because we haven't really. We've tried lots of innovations, it seems to me. We've tried, fortification of staples we know is a tried and tested strategy, and we know we have to have cooperation between the public and private sectors to make that work. And my colleague Venkatesh Manna can speak a lot more eloquently and knowledgeably about that than I can. But I think private-public networks are all about risk sharing and innovation generation, innovation around business models that work for nutrition. I think the sustainable business models that have scale and scope are going to be around business private networking. However, if you look at the 2008 Lancet series, I think it said that the private sector and nutrition are inextricably linked already in 2008. But to make that a more positive, to seize the opportunities, to gain and build trust, we need more evidence. And I don't think we've done a very good job in the research community and in the research funding community of supporting a good set of evidence around what works and what doesn't work in terms of public-private, I don't like the word partnerships, but public-private engagement and networking for nutrition. I don't think we've got a very good set of evaluations. And in the absence of those impact studies, there's always going to be distrust. And I think that's a real shame, because yes, while there are very high costs of getting it wrong with the private sector, there are very high costs of not engaging with the private sector. And in the paper, we talk about how to balance the risks in a sensible, open, transparent way. So I think this is my last slide. Enabling environments, key messages. Enabling environments are needed to bring stakeholders together. With the right enabling environment, we can make the direct interventions, the specific interventions more effective, we can make the sensitive interventions more effective, and we can crowd in champions into the nutrition space, people who never thought of themselves as nutrition champions. Key features of those so-called enabling environments: a collective approach, a political approach, stronger accountability, strengthened capacity, more creativity around resource mobilization, but with stronger checks and balances around those resource mobilizations. Leadership at all levels, not just fantastic leaders like David Nabarro, but leaders at local levels and all levels. We need them all. They can make a big difference. They can create and sustain momentum, and they can help us convert it into impact. And in terms of operational research, we know a lot about the what, not enough. We researchers never know enough about anything. We don't know enough about the what, but we know even less about the how and the why things work. And we need to move into that how and why space. And I think the thing we must never forget is that undernutrition can be reduced through deliberate action. It can be accelerated. Undernutrition reduction can be accelerated through deliberate action. Economic growth, where it happens, is fabulously important and helpful. But we don't have to rely on that. We can do other things. Sun is a movement. It describes itself as a movement because movements are what make change in the world. It helps you imagine a different world. It helps you change mindsets. It helps you stimulate and stir up action. And it helps create noise if people don't fulfill their commitments and don't live up to their responsibilities. So movements, we know that's a big force for change in most areas in international development, and it has to be for nutrition. So my final message is, let's not wait for political will, let's will our politicians to act. Thank you.